Hello, if you've been following my weekly video blog, you'll know that for the past few weeks during lockdown, I've been doing some scale modelling for the university that I work for. So I thought I'd just string a few clips from that series together that might be of interest to you if you're making bits of terrain, specifically if you're doing buildings in the kind of fantasy medieval urban environment. So this first video is going to be looking at doing the groundwork, making the architectural structures, the brickwork, and paving, and then we'll have a look at painting in the second video.
I'm using foam core here because it's a good sturdy base. It's also very easy to cut with a scalpel, very easy to work with, and very easy to punch holes in here to put things standing up when we need to. So that's what I'm going to use as a base. It's also what I'm going to use for most of the construction, and then I will put decorative surfaces, decorative effects over the top. So let's leave aside this base for the moment. I've decided to start on doing the bridge itself here, and this is my 1 to 50 bridge. And what I've done here is I've started off drawing onto the foam core, cutting out the shape of my bridge. I've then taken a scalpel and I've cut where the so this is the inside of the bridge here, this is the bottom side of the bridge, this is where the top road surface runs over. So I've just cut along that line, not going all the way through the foam core, and then I've cut down from the top of the foam core to thin that out, so that that wall there has ended up being now 2 millimeters thick, and I've got a 3 millimeter thick step out there that I can use to glue that road surface into place. Because I want my walls to be 5 millimeters thick, which in scaled up in 1 to 50, so scaled up, that's the thickness of my wall. So I want that 5 millimeters thick. I've taken this Depron foam and then glued that onto the back side of the foam core, and this is going to enable me to texture and draw these bricks on. This side is just the interior of the foam core with the outer side removed, with the actual board removed, so I can work on that. But I wouldn't be able to work onto the card itself, so rather than trimming both sides of the card off and then bulking out this bottom piece, I've decided to use the thickness of a piece of Depron, and I'm going to use that one to decorate the back. So first thing to do, having done that, is to trim that out. And if I'm careful here, I don't need to use a ruler, I can just follow the line of the piece that I've already stuck on there. This curve is quite tough. Important thing to remember is that you need to keep your scalpel nice and vertical while you're cutting curves, because otherwise you'll end up cutting an angle rather than a straight line all the way up. As you can see, this Depron foam cuts nice and neatly, nice and crisply. So there's the side of my bridge here. Now you can see the side that I've done the same thing with here. I've trimmed it down, put my brick texture on there, stuck some Depron sheet on the back, trimmed it, and then put this brickwork in here. And I'm now going to show you how to do this brickwork. And there are a number of different ways that you can do it, but this is a good way to know. And all this is going to involve is just drawing essentially into the surface of the Depron foam. Now there are 2 ways that you can do this. The first way is that you can use a scalpel, and you can use one of these tools. I believe you can get these for doing sort of nail art, but this is a sculpting tool. It's a ball-ended tool here, and what you can do is score your lines with your scalpel gently into the surface of the Depron, and then you can use the ball end on your tool to widen those lines, and you get very sharp, very clean brickwork there. Now obviously this is not clean brickwork, this is old stonework. It's rough, it's a bit uneven, so I'm not going to use this technique, because the other technique is to use a ballpoint pen, which will essentially do the cutting and the widening of the lines simultaneously, but it will leave marks on the surface, which is good if you're going to paint over those lines, because it means you can see exactly where your bricks are, exactly where you've put the marks in. It's much easier to see than if you're using something that doesn't leave a mark, any markings on the surface. So I'm going to start off by doing here this archway, and so I've done this in scale on this side, but I'm just going to use a standard ruler to transfer that across, because I already know that the sizing is right. And I found for this that if I use this roll of tape here, it actually fits quite nicely in place. So I can use this as my guide. So I've just drawn that quite gently along there. You don't need to press very hard. What you're trying to do is recess the Depron foam rather than sort of slice it. You're trying to crush it rather than slice it. You'll find this has a bit of a grain, and in some directions there'll be a resistance to being able to do this. Now this bottom piece here, this is actually quite flat, quite regular stonework. So all I'm going to do is draw those pieces in, and I know, because I looked earlier, that there are 16, well, there are 32 in total slabs all the way along here. There are 16 in each, so I'm just dividing that in half. Half again. Half again. Half again, and then the last one. There we go. And then I'm just going to take the back end of the scalpel, and I'm just going to push down on those to sort of spread the top surface out a bit. Otherwise it ends up looking a bit domed. You don't get that flat surface, but here you still get the channels in between. Just means you've got the flat surface. Okay, now the rest of this stonework here is very rough, it's very uneven. So I've got a ball of just standard aluminium foil here, and I'm just going to smush that onto the top surface there to add some texture. And if you can, you might need to sharpen a bit of it there by just kneading it and pressing it into a corner. If you can, try and recess that so that it's below the large prominent stonework at the bottom there. We want there to be a sort of definite two layer thing going on here. Now again, I've counted how many courses there are here, so I'm just going to mark those off, and they're very, very close together. They're quite small bricks. Okay, so very narrow layers there, and then you want to try and get these lines going as straight as possible. So one thing that I'm going to do is pop that onto the grid structure on my drawing board here and use that as a guide to make sure that I'm drawing these lines nice and straight. Now this technique works best if you can exaggerate slightly the stonework. Stones and bricks at 1 to 50 are very, very small. And it's quite often better to exaggerate it slightly to get the look that you want, rather than try and faithfully replicate the size of each brick. But it's up to you whether you want to go for full-on accuracy or you want to go for aesthetics. I don't think anyone, not very many people anyway, will go and count the number of courses of bricks in something. If you're working to this scale and you just want to give the impression of bricks, you can go a bit bigger than this. Okay, so there's my courses of bricks done in there. This last few I'm just going to draw in by hand. Okay, it doesn't look very much like stonework at the moment. And this is where observation comes into it, because obviously regular bricks you're used to seeing whole bricks staggered, but quite a lot of stonework brickwork is different. It doesn't follow that regular pattern. And this, on this bridge, it has 2 rows of full regular bricks, and then it has a row of half bricks. So every 2 rows you've got this row of narrow brick frontages. So that's what I'm going to try and replicate here. You can see I'm just drawing in where those bricks go, and you can draw along the horizontal lines as well while you're working. Just help define where those lines are, and after 2 rows I'm going to come in and do the narrow half bricks. There we go. And then to finish that off, I'm just going to take my foil again and just mush that top section in, much the same as I did with the back of the scalpel on the bottom row here, just to flatten off those top surfaces. Okay, so there's the other side of my stone bridge. I've already put the Mountboard on this piece, and that's all stuck nice and solid. And I've used Mountboard here because it's nice and firm, and this is, you can't probably see the creasing here. All I've done is just rub this strip along the edge of the table to crease it, and it does produce these crease lines, but I'm going to put a finish over that when we're finished, so it doesn't necessarily cause too much in the way of trouble. If you're worried about having a very neat smooth surface here, if this was a white card model, I would put a constructional layer of Mountboard down the middle of the bridge, and then I would face that off with some ivory card, because the ivory card will fold will curve a lot easier, a lot cleaner, and you won't get this creasing in it. So I would put that on as a decorative layer. As I say, in this case, doesn't matter too much. So that's going to slide either side of this piece here. What I do need to do is just remove a little bit of the card from this bottom edge here, so that the thickness, the 1.5mm thickness of the mountboard there, will sit flush with this outside edge, and you won't see a piece of cardboard stuck to the underside here. I'm using PVA glue, this standard white glue, wood adhesive PVA glue. Same thing, some wood adhesives are resin based and are not quite the same as a white PVA glue, but in this case it is the same thing. Dabbing some of that as cleanly as I can, but this is all being hidden anyway, so it doesn't matter too much. And then I'm going to press that in. And because this is already curved from going onto this first side, it's just a question of pressing that in place, and it sits together quite neatly in place there. For the first side, trying to hold this in position, I creased it, folded it, bent the card, just curving it with my hands like this until it's about the right size to sit in there, and then just held it. And it's a nice warm day. I only had to hold it for a couple of minutes, and there was enough bond there between the card and the foam core. If you wanted to use something like Yoo-hoo to bond it pretty much instantly, you could do that. It would take fine. You'll notice one of my little blocks from the top here has just popped off. That's fine, I can stick that back on. These bits I'm doing separately as an architectural feature, so that they're wider than the wall that they're sitting on. Again, you get that little shadow gap underneath them, which will show up better when it's painted. And these are just strips of the Depron foam that I have cut to the right size, and then a little bit of PVA glue on that top surface there. Starting from the top, just pop those in place. So I've got the bridge secured here in place, and I have done this in two sections, so that where the canal comes in the middle here, I can get in and work on these front faces. I've raised up the ground level here that I cut out, raised that up on these stilts, so there's a gap under here, and that's to reduce material usage. I don't need a big thick block of material here. This will give perfectly adequate support to my baseboard, and then when this is finished, I'll put some black card around the outside of here to provide a nice neat finishing touch to that surface. So I've built up these walls on the side in the same way as I did with the bridge. That's foam core with one side of the card removed, and then some Depron glued onto the other side, so that there's this line of card down the middle of it with the surface on either side that can be carved. And I've gone along and carved the brickwork on there, cut this little archway in here, carved the brickway along there. It can be difficult getting very tall, thin pieces like this to stick firmly with PVA glue, and I left this overnight to dry before I started detailing it. You will get a nice strong join, but what I like to do is to put some reinforcing down through those points. So you can use pins. I'm using this strip of just aluminium wire here, very thin aluminium wire, just pressed down through the foam layer, through that middle section of card, and then down into the bottom layer. Take care when you do that. What you don't want to do is pop out through the front surface. It can be easy to not go directly straight, and give it a bit of a spin as you go, so that it's kind of the cut edge there on the bottom is tearing its way through. You don't want to pushing the foam either side, because you'll cause distortion on the model. So give it a bit of a twist as you go, and then just snip off with a pair of snips at the top level. And because that's then visible, there's a little bit sticking out here. I've started putting this wall decoration separately over the top here, just using a cut piece of coffee stirrer there, using a small amount of the white glue spread along the top of the wall there, and then popping my cut pieces of Depron foam onto the top of the wall, pushing them down over where the reinforcing rods are, so that that's all nicely covered up. What I've done with the cobbles here is I could have removed the top surface of the foam core. In fact, I have removed the top surface of the foam core, but I could have removed the top surface and then detailed it in the same way with a biro as I have done on this brickwork here. But I thought I'd show you a different principle. This is actually Fuller's Earth cat litter on here, so you can buy big sacks of that for a couple of pounds in most supermarkets and pet shops. And what I've done here is select some of the larger, flatter pieces and just put some PVA glue on the surface, selected those, tessellated those. It took me probably about 2 hours to do that amount, so this is not a quick and easy process, but it's fairly effective, and you'll see that even better when it's painted up. This doesn't represent accurately the cobbling that's actually on this site. If you have a look at this site, you'll see the cobbling is much more regular than this, but I thought this would give another technique for you to look at. And where the cobbling goes onto the bridge here, I'm going to blend that in with some epoxy putty and detail that in a different way again, so you can see that. So I'm using two types of epoxy putty here. The first one, Milliput standard yellow grey. You can also get a superfine white, a terracotta one, and a grey one. And I'm going to be using green stuff. This is also called Needetite. It's an epoxy plumber's putty, but also used by model makers and model railway enthusiasts as a sculpting medium. With epoxies, you can mix all kinds of epoxies together to create different consistencies. There's no harm with that at all. If you're mixing in polymer clays, which are the other things that that model makers will use, be aware that that will alter the properties of the clay. Polymer clays are designed to be baked in order to go hard, so you don't want to use those in too great an amounts alongside an epoxy putty unless you're going to bake it afterwards, because it will remain soft. So once I've kneaded this all together and got a consistent uniform colour, I'm just going to start applying this to the base of the bridge here and to this side where there's a decorative cobbling feature. I'm not going to apply it for the moment to this side of the bridge, because I still want those to be separate so that I can work on them whilst I'm painting it. Sculpted cobble floor on that bridge. As you can see, one of the benefits of doing it this way is getting the cobbles in scale. If you put it next to a appropriately scaled figure, those are fairly realistic cobbles. These here on the sides, these are more like paving slabs. They're quite oversized for floor cobbles. Probably better suited to a rough stone wall or something in a slightly larger scale. But these cobbles are about the right size, and I've cut them off square on this end so that when I pop it together with the other side, I can just go straight in and sculpt the steps down. So I'm going to leave that to one side, wait for that to dry, and when that's fully set, then we can get on with the painting.